And hello, everyone. Welcome to the ComicBase Livestream. I'm your host, Pete Bickford, and for the next hour or so, I'm going to be trying to drop as much knowledge on you as I possibly can about ComicBase 2024 with all the tips and tricks and so forth that seem digestible in an hour's worth. That said, if you do have any questions, comments, need clarification on anything, please message it in the chat down below. Put it to @ComicBaseTV, and I will try to address it as best I can. In the meantime, I want to say hi to everyone who came out here. Oro Viejo is first in the house out here. Fall has arrived at the Twin Cities. Excellent. Most beautiful city ever when you get those 2 great weeks of fall. And yes, probably high for today. Frost and flurries forecast. Yes. Yeah, enjoy the fleeting moments while you've got it. Ed Billiot joining us from the Bay Area out in Richmond, California. Our mod Greg Hecht is in the house. Just closing up his pool in South Jersey. Xandu Comics out in Seattle. Let's see what we got going on here. Rob Weinberg's out here from Toledo. Ed Billy, I think I said yes already. And anyone else out there joining us from hither and yon. Anyway, welcome. A couple of quick announcements about comic basey type things, and then I'm just going to get straight into tips. And with your permission, I'm going to mix up my running order ever so slightly. I'm going to give kind of a big tip about internet. I'm going to save that for the very last. It was scheduled to be number 1, but occurred to me it was a little strange to put comic-based tips and then talk about internet as first thing. Anyway, so comic-based news, first of all, we have a brand new build of the main program. It's build like 829, 827, something like that. If you are interested in downloading tiny little incremental upgrades, this one, if you are running ComicBase outside of the United States on a non-US system, especially one that uses a comma for the decimal point in your local language, if so, this one's well worth getting because we fixed a couple of search issues that could hit numeric fields. If you're searching for all the comics that were sold for $3.99 or less, if you were writing that as 3.99 or less, you would potentially get an error before, and now you will not. And also, if you're running ComicBase on a monitor with just incredible amounts of screen magnification, so I don't know, you've got an 8K monitor that's 15 inches wide or something, and so you're magnifying everything 400% or some crazy number like that. The preview that's in the search should be working a little bit better for you here. That was reported by a customer of ours out in Australia. Hello to you. Hopefully the new build is better for you. But we did a little bit of tweaking on that one for you. One issue that we are looking into, we were just notified of, but the fix on it is a little involved. So I just want to let you know that we're aware of it and we're looking into it. If you have a late model iPhone Pro, that apparently Apple has done some gimcrackery with their camera handling, where they are forcing the camera to be not the camera that we would prefer when you go to scan a barcode. And as a result, you can't hold the camera in order to get the camera to focus where you want. You actually have to pull it far enough away from the comic you're trying to scan that it no longer is enough of it's in the frame. So it's causing trouble with not just our barcode scanning app, but pretty much all the barcode scanning apps on the whole planet right now, because that was a thing that they decided to do. At least the most popular API for doing barcode scanning within apps got thrown for a loop on that one. We are working on a fix, but it might take a little doing. So I'm just going to give you a heads up on that one. Plus, we're also going to apparently have to lay out for some really expensive hardware to test it on, because I don't actually have a late model iPhone Pro, but if any of you do have iPhone Pros who would like to be early testers on this one, please send a note. I'll put my contact info in there, pbickford@human-computing.com. Please drop me a note, and I would love to reach out to you with the early test builds as soon as we've got them available, so you can verify that it's working all right on your model. So that is a thing that happens in our lives. It's just another weekend for us. So, all right, guys, let's get on to it. Let me see here. Oh, Andre's joining us here. Welcome. And yeah, I think that we're just going to get straight into business here. And if we finish up early, well, then it's just, Miller time just comes that much earlier. All right. So I'm going to start with tip number 2. And let's see if my cool switcher works for this one. Oh, yes, the importance of database names. And isn't this like the most exciting sounding tip in the entire universe? But within these little headings are wrapped up about 5 little sub-tips. So even though we have 6 main tips to give you on the, if you actually count all the individual bits and bobs on the whole thing, there's something like 80 tips on the list here. But yeah, I'm extrapolating, but do with it with it what you will. And by the way, a lot of these tips are coming to us either from submissions in the forums or from people who call for tech support, and because we want to spread knowledge when we can't just spread an ultimate solution just through the program itself. And unfortunately, with freedom comes responsibility, and one of those things which we've wondered about whether we made the right call ever since ComicBase 7, where we allowed you to have more than one database, is whether or not having multiple databases ultimately was a force for good in the universe or not. We decided yes, but as a result of letting you have more than one database and letting you choose your own name as opposed to just forcing it to be called ComicBase Database, a fair amount of tech support gets generated for us over time. And so I want to clear up some misconceptions about that as we go here. So let me switch over to the other screen here, and I'll demo some of this stuff if I can. So oh, nope, wrong one. Let's try that one. There we go. All right. So first misconception I'd love to clear up, just for and for the long time you guys, you already know this, but for anyone watching this new, I would like to say, when you are using a database like ComicBase, by default, it's not like a word processor in that everything that you are typing as you're typing it is by default automatically saved. Let me put myself on the camera here. I get that little extra connection with the audience. So in other words, if I'm sitting here at Untold Stories from Iraq and Afghanistan, I change the quantity to 1 and I move on to here. If I were to exit this program right now or come back to it or go to another title and so forth, I come back. The second I leave that field where I put the 1 in, that 1 is saved. To that point, you emphatically do not need to say, oh, okay, well, I want to save my work now, so I better go into the file menu, and you'll notice that there's no save command. There is a thing called save a copy, which is making for spare copies of your database. You don't need to use save because it's saved automatically. Just when you're done with the account base, just exit the program. All right. So the reason I'm saying this, the reason I'm going to all this point to elaborate on this one is because we frequently are doing tech support with people who just, they feel like for whatever reason, it's like, okay, I want to make sure I've wrapped up all my stuff. I'm going to save my copy. And here, this is my April comics. This is my June comics. This is my July comics. And as a result, they wind up having like 5-6 copies of their working database. At which point confusion sets in because they start thinking, well, wait, which one was I working in last? And because ComicBase is always going to open the last database you were working with. And so if you had, this is my June comics, and then you say, well, let me go back and look at the April comics. And you say, okay, yeah, I found that thing. And then you exit, but then you launch ComicBase again. You maybe don't realize that you're now looking at the old copy of your database, and then hilarity ensues. Well, not really. Actually, confusion and despair sets in. So number 1 tip is do not make more than 1 copy of your database unless you've got a really solid reason for it. In other words, like a perfectly good reason is something like, hey, I want to have one database for my stuff and I want to have another database for my kids' stuff, or it's a separate collection, or that collection that I'm inventorying on spec, or things like that. Whenever possible, you really want to do all your stuff from one database. Even things like marking, these are the ones I want to sell, these are the ones I want to get autographed. There's things in the program itself where you can just check off certain fields and say, okay, if I ever want to get a list of just all the comics I want to sell, you would just use this for sale field, or the or one of the custom fields if you want. And then if you just do a find on all the things marked as for sale, or the you custom field get autographed or whatever it is, that would give you your other list without having to make you manage a whole separate database. So try to keep the number of databases in your life to a minimum. And secondarily, I'm going to say, unless you've got a good reason for it, leave the standard database name. It's called ComicBase Database.cbdb if you have your file extension showing, and that's a perfectly good, not normal, very, very boring name. It's the name that when you first launch ComicBase, it will create that database by default. It'll be a blank data. Well, it'll be a database with all the data on all the comics of the universe, but they'll all be quantity 0. The conditions will all be near mint. And what you mostly do when you're entering your books in your ComicBase is you're changing that stock database to put in your own stuff. But it's not actually unless you've got a good reason not a bad idea to just leave it named ComicBase Database. You don't need to call it Pete's database or Fred's database or whatever else. The reason you might want to keep the default name is because that way there's absolutely nothing to remember. if you move ComicBase to another machine, if you reset your preferences, if you reset your windows, if all that things, because ComicBase is always going to look for a database called ComicBase Database whenever you launch it, if it can't find anything else. And that way it's going to open up your right database if you've left it at the default name. If you've called your database, Pete's Comics, on the other hand, and you go and you blow away your preferences or do things like that, ComicBase, when you launch the first next time, is going to go and say, "Oh, okay, I don't see the old database. Let me go ahead and create a ComicBase database and open that one." And that's fine as long as you know that the next thing you got to do is then file open, as in over here, go into the file menu and say open dot dot dot, and then choose something other than ComicBase database. Pete's ComicBase database, Pete's Livestream database is the situation be, or what have you. But if you'd like to just not have that kind of grief in your life, not have anything to remember extra on the whole thing, leave it ComicBase database. It'll all be fine. All right. With that said, let me see here. Yes, when you are using ComicBase, another thing that's very important to make sure is happening is make sure you tell Sidekick what database you're running. So again, this is all kind of handled by automatically. Let me go ahead and launch Sidekick on here on the demo machine. Give me just a second to do that. Sidekick. Okay, so Sidekick is the companion program that comes with ComicBase. It runs down here at the bottom. It's called the notification area, and what he's there to do is to handle all the kind of like the scut work, all the boring stuff, updating your database, backing up to the cloud, stuff like that. And by default, when you first launch ComicBase and you go through, it goes through a little thing saying, "Hey, a couple steps to get you started," and it gives you like 3 screens about making backups and about setting some certain defaults, and most people just kind of hit next till it all goes away. But one of the things that it did is by default is it adds your current database to the list of database that Sidekick will try to manage. So Sidekick over here, by the way, can manage more than one database if you let it. But one thing you'll want to do here is, if you have more than one database, is go up here, especially if you've used database other than just ComicBase database, go ahead and launch Sidekick, go to its settings, and here I've managed to add it 3 times, which is not a good idea. And make sure that your current database is added to the list of databases that Sidekick will update. So for instance, if I want to have my Livestream demo database that we use on the show here, if I want to have Sidekick update that one, I'm just going to add it to the list of database that it manages. And now I've got it managing my default stock database and also my Livestream database. And then I just go ahead and hit save. All right, but again, if you only are using one database and you just kind of did the default things and you just click through those first initial things, it'll all be set up the right way to start with. You don't need to do anything extra. But if you did decide to choose a different name or anything else like that, do go ahead and tell Sidekick what database you're working with so it can do its thing. All right, next up under this object is where you want to save your database. You say like, okay, this is getting very complicated, Bickford. What do I care where I save my database? Now, you might notice that if you look at the full path name of where ComicBase database is saved, it's this elaborate thing. It's C users, Peter Bickford, that's my name, documents. So in other words, all this first part comes down to is my documents folder. It's actually called your personal documents folder. Inside there is a folder called Human Computing, that's our company, and a folder called ComicBase Databases, because we store all the databases there. And this thing's just called ComicBase Database.cbdb. If I switch over to the Livestream one, notice it's all the same except it's called ComicBase Livestream database.cbdb. All right, so let's go out of Sidekick and let's talk about where those paths live on my disk. So everyone, when you first get going in Windows, there's some folders that Microsoft leaves open to writing to, and there's ones that it really wants to lock down. So let me go up to the top C drive on my machine over here. All right, so everyone has got a C drive. That's it's typically the drive that's got your Windows on it, and there's various stuff on it, right? Your mileage may vary. Program files and program files x86 are typically where your programs are installed. The Windows folder is where Windows itself is installed. Obviously, do not go messing with that one. Windows won't let you for the most part, but don't be messing it for the most part. Where your user stuff typically lives is in here in the user folder. In particular, there's 2 users that kind of come baked in with any new computer install. There's your name, so if it's on if it's on Bob Smith's computer, there'll be a user called Bob Smith or Bob S or something like that, and there'll be a a public folder. In each of those, here's the Pete Bickford one. You'll notice that there is a documents folder. Let's go back out to the public one, and you'll notice that there's also a public documents folder in the public folder. And there's actually human computing folders in each of those ones. They're meant for different sorts of things. So, for instance, the personal documents folder is meant to store stuff that's unique to me. So, if there were other people, like if I let my kid use my computer, there might be a Pete's Kids name, folder inside there, which they could have their own copy of the ComicBase database and so forth. Whereas in the public information out here, that's where we store stuff that everyone on the computer should be able to get to. That's where, for instance, we'll put the pictures and the thumbnails that come with all the stuff. No need for us to install all that picture stuff twice on the same computer. That'd be a waste of space, and it'd be silly. So let's go back to where my documents live. So here at the Peter Bickford folder, I'm going to go under Documents. All right, and there's our human computing folder, and there's ComicBase databases, right? And here's ComicBase database and a whole bunch of backups. Now, you'll notice every time we exit the program, it makes a time-stamped backup. So here's a backup from 2023 at 9/13, so 9/13/2023, September 13th at 12:09 p.m. Right? That's how you read those ones. And the way that ComicBase is set up by default is it's going to it's going to make 5 backups of your current database, and as soon as you if I were to open and close ComicBase database again and I exit, it would get rid of the oldest backup and it would replace it with one from 10/4, which is today, right? So you've always got a way of going back in time here, is to look at different copies of your database in case something really weird happened with your computer. You caught a virus, you did some kind of disastrous amount of bad data entry or whatever your thing was. The cat walked across your keyboard and made all your quantities be silly. Whatever the thing was, you've got a way of going back in time just by going back to the appropriately named backup. But anyway, these guys are all stored in my personal documents folder. And you might sometimes you'll see this over on the side here where it has the shortcuts to your folders. If I click on documents over on the side here, that's typically your personal documents folder. That'll take me straight to this same Pete's documents folder here. So you see I'm at the same place. All right. The one thing, the one thing that gets in the way of all this personal document, public document stuff is a fun little program that Microsoft came up with called OneDrive. So OneDrive is Microsoft's equivalent of Dropbox, and they decided that that is their universal document sharing to the cloud backup, whatever situation that they're going to roll out increasingly across. Well, I mean, it started out as a paid portion of Microsoft Office, and then as Microsoft Office is, at least Office 365 is getting pre-installed with most Windows 11 installs, more and more you're seeing this pre-installed on people's computers. And along with that, the Microsoft has been doing a kind of a nasty little bit where they don't just install OneDrive on your machine, and they don't just tell OneDrive to back up your documents folder. No, they went one further. They actually threw a redirect into your copy of Windows by default, more and more. And not everybody, but a lot of you. If you ever save something into your documents folder, but then if you go back out and you look at its path, and you'll see that's not stored in C users your name / documents, but instead it's stored in C users your name / OneDrive / documents. And you say, wait, I stored my documents. How come it's in this OneDrive documents folder? Where'd that come from? And where it came from is it came from Microsoft redirecting everything in your documents folder into their copy of OneDrive documents. The theory being that by doing that, then they're just making it easy for you to automatically back up every one of your documents to their OneDrive. Now, there's a couple problems. One is, number one, they didn't ask you. They just did it. There was never a part where you opened up your computer and said, hey, did you want us to be taking every single document that you put on your computer and back it up to our cloud, whether you wanted it to or not? They never asked that. They certainly didn't ask you about redirecting a folder. You poor dears, you'd probably be confused by all this talk of redirecting. That's probably the way the discussion went down over in Redmond. That is my pretty decent guess, I'm guessing. But anyway, so as a result, and then the final thing is this would be fine if it was like, hey, list of, here's a list of my last expenses from my last business trip, right? Some nice short little Excel file. If it was something like, good God in heaven. I don't know if you guys heard that, but I just got a beep. It just blew me out of my socks here in the headphone. I'm guessing something in the background. My computer just finished. Um, anyway, but if you were, if you what you were saving your OneDrive document was little things like, hey, this is my, notes for a novel. Here's my office expenses. Here's, my shopping list, stuff like that. Little things. Then it wouldn't matter that it was, going up to the, the cloud, because it wouldn't be taking a ton of time and space. No, but on the other hand, because Microsoft is redirecting your entire documents folder increasingly, and because one of the few places that a program like ComicBase is allowed to install and do writing of things is into the documents folder, you've now suddenly got what could be a 3 GB file that it's going to want to constantly move up to Microsoft Cloud every time you touch it. Remember, all the stuff in ComicBase is saved every time you leave a field. Well, that file then looks like it was changed every time you leave a field. And if OneDrive is monitoring your stuff in the background, it is perpetually trying to back a 3 GB file up to the cloud, which, basically makes your internet run like a dog. It takes forever. It's always backing up really a partial copy of the file, because databases, when they're open on, and in use, are only partly on disk. They're partly in memory. They're only all the way on disk when they're closed. So it's doing tons and tons of useless work, and it's probably also blowing away your, the capacity limits of your OneDrive at the same time, because Microsoft also starts most accounts with 5 gigs of space on OneDrive. So, yeah, well done, Microsoft. You did a terrific job. Thank you for, again, taking over everyone's document folder, not asking, backing up everything for them without their risk, and not caring what type of documents you're doing it to, because you just made everything really, really much worse. So, to combat this, we've actually had to write into ComicBase a thing which looks for the redirection of your folder by OneDrive. Again, it's not even our program, but we have to watch out for it and say, hey, if you ever launch ComicBase and you get a message that says, hey, whoa, it looks like you're using OneDrive, you probably don't want to move your ComicBase there, because all the aforementioned bad stuff will happen. And so, is it all right with you if we store it in your public documents instead? And so if you do that, then what we do automatically is we copy the initial ComicBase database into your public documents folder, which, at least for now, is beyond the clutches of OneDrive, and you can move on with your life without all the things getting weird. The only thing you got to remember then is that your database is no longer in your own nice personal I only own it folder, for personal documents on your thing. It's now in the public documents, folder on your thing. If there are 2 people in your household that both have their own accounts, that's going to cause some kind of drama, because you'll both be saving into the same folder. That's not a typical situation for most ComicBase accounts, but is something to be aware of. But yeah, so that's a thing. And then the final thing I want to say on the subject of document naming, because you didn't think I could get 20 minutes out of just the idea of naming documents, but based on just one of my recent tech support calls, is, for the love of God, do not store your database in your program files folder. The reason for it is this. Let me switch over to the PC here. All right, so looking over at just the main level of, let me go ahead and close some windows here so it's a little bit clearer. All right, so I'm just going to look up this. This is on Stuart, my demo computer. Looking over at our main level here, again, we have a number of top level folders here. And all the stuff you're supposed to write to belongs in the users folder. You're not supposed to write to the top level of the C drive, especially. That one is particularly well locked down by Windows. You're not supposed to, you could make a new folder called ComicBase Stuff. If you were to make it yourself ahead of time, then we could write to it, but we could not actually, we don't have the privileges running as an application on your computer to make that folder after the fact. But anyway, so all your work is meant to be done inside of your own folder over here. The reason is because Microsoft expects you to be able to write to those folders. One thing they really, really, really don't want applications doing, especially ComicBase or really anybody, is they don't want you writing into the program files folders, because this is seen as an antivirus measure. If you could download some program from the web and it would write new things into your program files willy-nilly, then you probably could, trick you into launching those programs, or at least do bad things. And seriously, it also could even overwrite programs that had already been installed if it had those kind of privileges, and bad things would happen. So one thing I've seen, and for some reason this always seems to be the case when someone comes in from a very old version of ComicBase, takes their disk over to Best Buy, and Best Buy says, "Oh, please transfer this to my brand new sparkling Windows 11 machine I just bought." I've lost track of the number of times I've seen the helpful people at Best Buy say, "Oh, okay, fine. Let me go ahead and take all the old documents and I'm going to dump them into your program files folder," which is insane. I guess because they saw a human computing folder in there, they figured, good enough, right? There's a human computing folder for our programs, but they figured, I'll put the documents in there too. And so where this comes to us is we get this one as a tech support call will come in, say, "Hey, I just got my machine back from Best Buy. I'm trying to open up my database," and it says, "I can't write to this database because it's locked. It's on media that cannot be written to." And what that comes down to is, when you're writing, if your database is been moved into your program files, a regular application doesn't have the clearance. It doesn't have, it's like the security clearance to write into that directory. So when we try to open up your database and write changes to it, it says, "Whoa, dude, you're not running as an administrator right now. You're not allowed to, because did you know you're in the program files folder?" And so anyway, don't do that. You do not want to put your database in the program files folder. If your database is in the program files folder, highlight it, hit Control X, move it out, go over to your documents folder, over here under C, users, your name, documents. Human computing is the right place for it. ComicBase databases, paste, and move it back in there. And then if you double click on that one to launch it, then everything gets much better in your life. But anyway, you would not think that you would have 25 minutes of me talking about nothing but program files. I think we've had about as much fun with this as I can stand. So let me take a couple quick questions and we'll move on from this one. Let's see here. Greg Heck points out, "This is just an opportunity needing to buy an iPhone 15 or something to upgrade my personal phone and deduct as a business expense." I would do this, except it's not that much fun for me because I switched from. I think I got pissed off with Apple circa the iPhone 6. It was when I think I just laid out like some stupid amount of money for the iPhone, and just it in some tiny amount of time it had blown out on me, and they were going to charge me the price of a whole brand new $400 or $500 phone in order to get the battery working again. I was like, bag on you people. And so I walked to the kiosk next door in the mall and switched to Android, and honestly, I haven't really had a lot of cause to look back since. I've periodically dipped my toes into the different iPhones to see what they're doing. The camera handling is actually quite nice as a user. It does the typical idiosyncratic thing as a developer when you're trying to deal with what Apple's doing. But other than that, it's just like, man, the price premium on iPhones is crazy compared to what the same money buys on Android. So I have not felt a need to switch back since making that switch probably about 10 years ago. But so it goes. But yeah, in order to just get a testing device, usually you can get cheap ones off eBay. But man, to even get a working iPhone Pro 12 or 13 off eBay, it's like $500, unless you want to buy one that's obviously stolen, which it's like, no, we're not doing that. So anyway, but yeah, I'll have to suck it up one way or another. But like I say, if you guys do have iPhones of your own that you want to donate, or not donate the iPhone, but if you want to have us kick you in as early testers, I would certainly appreciate it. And let's see here. Steve Leo says, "Make sure you change the drive letters well in Sidekick. If you use a separate data drive, Sidekick defaults to the C drive." Yes, Sidekick, all the things that ask you to look for a database in our world are always going to default to the personal documents, human computing, ComicBase databases folder will be the first place they look. If you do store your data on a different drive, obviously steer off to that drive when you go there. All right, on to the next thing. Fun with secret context menus. Secret context menus, I hear you say. It's like, how could something like that not be fun? All right, so what a lot of people, and I guess it surprised me a little bit, do not know about ComicBase when you first get into it. Let me go to a title that's got a bunch of stuff in it, just so we have some fun with it. Let's go to Batman. All right, so and let's flip the camera over to the demo, and why am I still? I see that I'm programmed there, but I don't see it there. That is weird. Weird. Why is my video switcher not switching? Okay, demo. Hold on, guys. This is strange. All right. So I've got a video signal I'm looking at. I see it in the program view, but when I look at StreamYard, it does not do the switch. Well, isn't that special? Okay. Well, let's work around it because this is showbiz and that's how we roll. All right, I'm gonna launch ComicBase on my other computer here, and you know what? We'll make it happen. Give me a second here. Okay, moving over to the other monitor. Yes, strangely enough, the reason I do this on a different computer is because this way I don't need to play around with monitors so much. But okay, let's get over here. Okay. All right, so all right, we got ComicBase over on the other monitor here. All right. Thank you for hanging with me during the technical weirdness. All right, so anyway, so in ComicBase, so you might know, for instance, that if I go here and I click on, and this is, it's like I got to switch my the monitor that I am staring at during the show to the other input now because otherwise I can't see it because it's hidden by a meter. All right, are we there? Yes, we are there. Okay, great. I can see again. All right, so if you are in ComicBase and you click on anything in particular, most people know that if you right click, you'll get a quick list. It's called a context menu. So it's not the main menu bar up here. It's a menu based on the things that I've selected. Now, by the way, to get the full benefit of this in ComicBase, make sure you're not just clicking on just a rando item because you'll notice all sorts of new things. If I just have a rando item selected because there's no line selected, I can't do a bunch of stuff. On the other hand, if I click and I select the line and I right click, suddenly a lot more things are lit up. So definitely do that. So that's called a context menu, and this is the main one for the issues grid. If you're looking at things in album view mode, if you right click on any item in the album view, it also has a context menu. But there's a couple others that are worth looking at because they're kind of neat. So for instance, let's say I want to print out, well, first of all, let's talk about some of the things that you can do in the context menu very quickly. Let's say I just entered a copy of Den of Geek #1 here, and I want to print a label for it. Very, very quick way to do that. Highlight the line, bounce down here and say ID label, F6, print, preview, and of course it's on the other monitor because nothing else works. And so then suddenly I'm staring at the label just for that one issue or those issues that I selected. Because I did my selection over here, I don't need to go to the reports menu, go say select issues, go out, find the title, do the stuff like that. Because I already made my selection out here. It's smart enough that it can say, all right, I know what he's talking about here as far as what he wants to do with it. Let's just go ahead and show him the labels for the ones he has highlighted. And so that's a really quick way of doing common stuff like that just from the main menu. Whenever you can do stuff from the context menu, it's typically a little faster than going through the main menus to get to the same place. But there's also a couple other context menus that maybe you didn't know were there. So for instance, right up here by the words Den of Geek, there's a hidden context menu. And I apologize for this, guys, because I didn't have a good way of telling you how that there was a menu attached to it. If you guys can think of a non-obtrusive way that you could do that over random text, I'm all ears. I really am. But if you right click on this one, you'll see that right on the title that I can do a number of cool things. Really good. Make the turn on the magnifier so you can see it a little bit. Oh no, that's right. It won't work on this machine. Anyway, so for instance, I can say find all Den of Geek stuff on Atomic Avenue. I can search Google for Den of Geek, see what it knows. I can search the Grand Comic Database for Den of Geek. I can print divider labels for the title series. I do this all the time. Whenever I'm just browsing around, I realize, oh man, I need to make a title divider label for whatever, random title. I come to ComicBase, I go to, I don't know, Josie and the Pussycats. Okay, second series, you're right. Okay, I need to get myself a divider label for it. Right click on that, print divider labels, boom, and I'm ready to go. And so that is by far the quickest way to move around and do that sort of work. But you also can do things like, hey, give me an item checklist for the series, print a price list for the series. And you also can do a quick report. So, just do me a quick report of just all the Josie and the Pussycats, books in the database. Very, very useful, the stuff that's attached to the title itself. There's another one over here. Let's say I want to go and I want to look at the picture that's up here, right? Because I want to mess with it. I want to crop it in, or I want to do some editing on it. You could right click on the image thumbnail itself and say show picture file, and it will pop open a window and it'll take you straight to, in Windows, where that picture file is living, and so you can mess with it that way. It's a quick way to get to the picture folder if you're looking at a title. All right, and the last one I want to use, and this isn't really, it's not really a context menu. It's almost like the lack of a context menu, but it's a hack. And I'll just go out and call it for what it is. But if you've ever opened up multiple databases and you see under file menu, the recent databases is always going to remember the last bunch of databases you've ever worked with. Well, let's say that, you don't want to have one of the entries in there anymore. Like, let's say I don't want to have the master ComicBase database in that list anymore. I just want it to only show Pete's inventory database. Well, I could get rid of it by going to where master ComicBase database is, changing the name or changing the folder or moving it someplace else. Then if I exit the program, I launch again, it always checks and verifies that these files that are remembered from the recent databases still exist. And if it sees that they've moved around, it'll drop it from the menu. But that's a lot of work. So what I can do instead, if I want to, is I can just right click on an entry in the list under recent databases, and it'll say, hey, did you want to remove this database from the recently opened databases? And if so, if I say go, then it'll take it out of that list automatically. So that's a hack, especially, like I say, if you guys are opening up different databases, maybe you've been opening up some old backups, things like that, and you just want to clear up your list, pull up the recent databases, right click on the one you don't want, and say, yeah, I'd like to get rid of it, and it'll take care of it. Okay, and let me go here. Let's see here. Our mod wants to remind everyone, for folks running ComicBase on Parallels on a laptop, not a 2-button mouse, does the title hidden button menu come up with a control click or with a shift control click? I believe that's actually a parallel setting that controls what that is. Realistically, yeah, so I mean, you guys might know, I worked at Apple for like 9 years in the interface group, a number of the different interface groups, and also on the developer teams. It blew my damn mind, especially as we were trying to reach out to the business crowd at that time, that we were still selling a 1-button mouse. Steve Jobs had the idea that no, we have to keep mice is very elegant and simple. We're going to keep it that way. Everything be damned. I mean, it was very much one of those things. Like, I came up with the idea the first time out, and it was wonderful and perfect in all its forms, and I will never take a cue from anyone else, because at the time, like Xerox and Star and a bunch of other people had mice. Doug Engelbart invented the mouse. Apple was not the first one to come up with the idea. And they all had different ideas for how many buttons you should have. Xerox in particular had, a whole bunch of them, and there were all sorts of things you could do. They made the mouse very complicated. And one of the lovely things about Steve Jobs is he had a good way of kind of cutting through the cruft and saying, no, we're going to have one button. There shall be one button and one button only. And that was great until someone invented the context menu. And then the context menu was just ridiculously useful. And so this caused a bit of a kerfluffle over at Apple, where the PC guys, obviously, they were knocking off Windows, was a knockoff of the Mac interface at that point, and they had no trouble at all saying, hey, 2 buttons, hey, why not 3? Side scroller, whatever. They went nuts. They had no problem with that. They had no moral compunctions about any of it. But the idea of having more than one button on a mouse really came hard over at Apple. And so they were like, well, it'd be really intuitive. Instead of a second button for context, menus, which people seem to want to use, well, we'll have them hold down the control key when they click the mouse, and that'll be, see, how we can still have one button, and it'll just be totally not at all intuitive. And so that's what Apple's solution was. That apparently stays to this day, on Apple trackpads and things like that. They kinda cheat around it with trackpads where, like, they can kinda tell now that you were kind of tapping toward the right of the mouse area, so that maybe that's a right button, maybe, or versus whether it's a left area. So they'll do things like that where they'll let you have 2 buttons as long as they don't have to say they had 2 buttons. But if for any of the, Macs you've got, if they still have a one-button mouse, the official way is still control click is how you get the right button action. Everyone I know who still uses, Macs to get real work done has since then gone out and bought just a proper mouse. And I believe Apple even came up at some point, when Jobs was not in control of things. I do believe they came with like a pro mouse or something, which of course had to be ridiculously expensive, but which also had like 15 gizmos and buttons and ways of doing stuff. And there was a way of, like, sliding your finger across the top of it ever so delicately that would give you scrolling. And yeah, so it's yeah, what are you gonna do? But anyway, I do believe in the modern life, that whether or not you do that with a control click or a shift click or whatever else is um, just it's controlled by the preferences in Parallels itself. So I believe the default though is you have to hit control click. All right, and okay, and at least one person who didn't know about the GCD thing, which is happy. Okay, so great. Moving on. All right, next set of thingies. Did I cover everything I wanted to say about the secret context menus? Yes, I did. Okay, moving on. Hotkeys and keyboard shortcuts. All right, so going back to talking about times at Apple, which is a real thing I did. Let's see if I can put myself in the frame here. Yes, I can. Awesome. So the again, there's a certain wanting to be pure, that was very much in vogue at Apple, especially back in the day, and so Apple was very love-hatey with the keyboard itself. It was not until the several rounds of keyboards that the Macs had put out before they embraced the idea that there ought to maybe possibly be function keys on the top of the keyboard. And even then, when they did that, they forced mapped the first four of them to be, I believe it was cut, copy, paste, and undo. They were just the bindings were actually just built in if you hit F1, F2, 3, F2, 3, 4 for those. And the excuse that we would give at that point is, well, in order to address the needs of the business community, which is to say everyone in the 95% of the world at the time who was running PCs, we knew that we had to sell something with function keys because all the software that these Macs are going to be used to emulate with, or the terminals or whatever else they're going to connect with, all was assuming you had function keys. And so if they didn't ship a keyboard with function keys on it, and again, you cannot believe how controversial this was within Apple at the time. But the thought was that unless we add function keys, at least to some of our keyboards, we're not going to be competitive. So we showed them, with our first keyboard not having all the function keys, certainly didn't have things like scroll lock and up down and stuff like that. And yeah, so I mean, a lot of just absolute rank stupidity went by just with the idea of, like, we didn't want to play with the other kids that well. But one of the things that early Macs was kind of infamous for is they really did not love initially the idea of doing anything other than using the mouse to get to menu items. And so it was only grudgingly that they would do things like, say, if I wanted to go to the items and I wanted to go and, say, add by barcode, there were interface papers that were put out by Apple that said, oh, no, no, no. I know it feels like it's way faster to just hit Control I, and say add by barcode, Control I, as opposed to take the mouse, swing up to the top, where the menu bar is, find the items menu, swing down, say add by barcode. There were Apple scientists, swear to God, swearing up and down that that was a faster action, and it was just because it was such a boring action that your mind was perceiving it as longer. But at the same time, that the stopwatch would inevitably say that no, 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 the mouse was far faster. Um, with greatest respect to my colleagues, I even though I once bought into this myself, I have since been dissuaded by people mocking up time tests and getting out their own stopwatches. And yes, the keyboard is worlds faster, largely because of a thing called Fitts law, which we've talked about before. Is the idea that if I need to acquire a target using a mouse, how long it takes me is a function of how big the target is and how far away it is from my mouse. So on the Mac, Mac did one thing really right, which was they made the menu bar pegged to the top. So in other words, the dimensions effectively of the menu bar as far as a target were essentially 51 miles tall, but they were only as wide as the menu item itself. So I could be wrong by as many pixels I want going up, but as long as I was right, left and right, it would hit it. The PC is not quite as good on that one because you can't slam your mouse to the top and be hitting the top menu. There is no top menu on a PC, but there's menus within Windows. So the target on a PC is only as wide as the word itself and only as tall as the word itself. So it's a smaller target, and if you're not very close to it, then you've got a long way to move the mouse, and it's relatively slow to get that. And you've got to actually hit two targets. You've got to hit one item, which is the items menu, and you've got to scroll down, and then you've got to hit add by barcode. So that's a lot of work. That's a lot of targeting, and it's all very precise targeting. Whereas if I just want to, go to my keyboard and go slam Control I, and of course it comes up on the other menu. It's, I go and close this one, open again. Yeah. Sorry, I got to peg to the other screen. But yeah, that's basically instant. So with all this preamble said, we at Apple, even in the back in the day, no one could argue cut, copy, paste, and to a lesser extent undo were infinitely faster done by keyboard. The scientists at the time that I worked with were swearing, well, that's due to a fluke of the where your left hand sits and the fact that we're so genius that we put XCV next to each other, and we chose those because they almost make sense for cut being X, copy being C, and paste is V? No, it's the keyboard next to cut and copy, and so we thought, okay, that's sure, we'll put it there. And then Z was along for the ride, that's undo. There was no arguing that was far faster than anything you could do with the mouse. I mean, there are menu items up in every Mac product going way back when, same on the PC, for cut, copy, paste. Windows, usually, as usual, missing the mark on all this stuff. When they decided to, have their big initiative around Windows 3.1 to become much more, actually it was Windows 95, to become much more user, awesome. They decided, okay, we're going to have the keyboard shortcuts, we're going to have the edit menu, but we're also going to add toolbars everywhere. So we'll give you a little tiny icon, 16 by 16 pixels wide, that you can try to hit as well, because I don't know, Mac seems to have icons, so we'll do that. Anyway, this is all insanity, guys. I'm just telling you. Realistically, it matters a lot what the efficiencies of your keyboard, is in, and there's no getting around it. Theology aside, if you value your efficiency, get good with keyboard shortcut commands. Especially get good with the handful that you use a lot. So, for instance, all of us, just as typists at this point, should know, that Control X is cut, Control C is copy, Control V is paste. That our fingers ought to feel that right at their fingertips at this point. Control Z for undo, depending on how often you need to undo things. Yeah, not a bad thing to have in there. And but you also know things like Control P is print, right? Now, when it comes to ComicBase, there's a few ones that, I'm going to say one bit of somewhat valid testing that we did back at Apple, when we came down to the subject of command keys, is we said, all right, fine. These things seem to be, now that we actually test them rigorously, they do seem to be far faster using keyboard shortcuts a lot of the time, but there's no telling which keyboard shortcuts are relevant to a given person's work. And so they thought that the practical limit that they could have, again, remember this is on a Mac with no function keys, they thought this is about 25 items that have any kind of function key at all, or control key, command key equivalent. They thought that was pretty much the limit of what you'd want, but they also thought that that's also about as many as anyone will ever memorize in any situation. As usual, stretching the point a bit, but there is an underlying point, which is to say, you could have, and Windows, as usual, overdid everything. They have Alt key access to everything under the sun. No one other than just people who can't see particularly well typically uses them. There is nothing wrong with having a lot of function keys in a program, but more than, I'm going to say, for most users, about 25 of them is typically gilding the lily. You're not getting anything new out of that. It's not helping. And you're kind of cluttering the interface. So, for instance, unless you're going to hit it repetitively and it it warrants the extra cognitive load of having these things in there. You'll notice, for instance, there's no command key shortcuts for any of these, any of these reports up here, because there could be, in time, maybe someday we'll have 50 reports in ComicBase, who knows, but you're probably not going to hit them so often that it's going to reward your efforts to try to remember. Let's see, the top earners and losers report, was that Command Shift G, or is that, I mean, it doesn't make sense. So we in ComicBase, we tried to kind of limit how many shortcut keys we have in the program. And even then, we know you're not going to remember all the ones that are relevant to your life. But I will say it is worth, certainly, go down the menus, look at the command keys that are defined in here, and say, this is something I do a lot. So think about memorizing it, because it will make you faster. And even I as I was preparing for this whole thing, I don't know offhand, without looking, all the command keys are built into ComicBase. But I do remember, I do have memorized the top 5 or 6 that I use all the time. And so let me tell you about what those top 5 or 6 are for me. And again, your mileage on this will vary. So for instance, um, X, C, and V, obviously, cut, copy, paste. Your fingers should feel that. They're bones. They're used everywhere on Windows, yeah, and they are there. Control A is select all. So if I hit that in any list, and if I ever want to select all the items in it, let's go to, say, something more impressive, like Batman and Robin, right? Anytime I'm in a list and I want to just highlight everything all at once, just select in the list, Control A, and boom, everything is selected instantly. You will use this a lot, and it's supported in all the listing ComicBase. Definitely worth remembering that one. If I need to find something, now I can get there a number of different ways in ComicBase. I can click up here under Find. If I don't see what I want immediately, I can say Find Other. I can go over here and I can click on the Find icon over there, and get to it that way. I can go under the, I believe, the items menu and hit Find, or I can just do what my fingers now remember and just hit Control F, and it will instantly pop open the window. In this case, unfortunately, the wrong screen, but hey, that's me. This is why I typically demo on the other machine. But when the live stream is in effect, I'm not going to unplug the machine in order to keep the stream rolling. But anyway, but yes, Control F, Find, I use all the time to get to Find. Worth remembering on that one. Control I, add by barcode, I use constantly. Whenever I put in the week's comics, Control I gets me straight to the thing where I'm entering the whole thing in. I'm constantly printing ID labels for things. So for instance, I could highlight them down here. I could come down to the context menu and hit F6, or if I want a quick report, F7, or I do it so frequently, I just highlight the items and then F6 gets me straight there. Same thing goes for F7 for a quick report. And then 2 more that I'm going to say I use so often that it's worth mentioning. If I'm on a given title and I want to add another one, Control N is going to add a new issue to that screen, next comic issue, and Control D is going to allow me to duplicate one. So for instance, if I have the 100th anniversary 1A edition of the X-Men over here and I want to make another copy that's just like it, except this one's going to be, say, the G edition, Control D pulls up duplicate, and that's a good one for that one. Your mileage will vary on these ones, so I'm going to say investigate the program a bit and have a look around. But yeah, it is worth remembering a few, because it will help you a lot. With that said, those are the control keys, or they're called the shortcut keys, is their official name in Windows. There's also a couple of what are called hotkeys defined in ComicBase, which are really, really worth knowing. And this one is, like, if I taught you guys one tip for all of ComicBase, this is the tip right here. Which is to say, there's a hotkey defined in all the grids, all the album views and so forth, that if I've got a bunch of stuff highlighted like this, and I don't have the cursor set to any particular field, I'm just highlighted the row as a whole. If I hit any key on my keyboard from 0 to 9, like if I hit a 1, suddenly all those comics are quantity 1. Hit a 2, all those comics are quantity 2. 3, so on and so forth. And if I want to zap them back to 0, just hit a 0. You also can go and hit plus and minus, and it will add 1 or subtract 1 to anything you've got selected. If you are entering comic books and all your stuff is in order and you're just highlighted, okay, I got one of these, one of these, one of these, one of these, one of these. Okay. And I want to just put quantity 1 in stock, highlighting them like that and just punching 1, by far the fastest way to do anything. It's faster than quick change, it's faster than barcode scanner. It is the fastest way to enter comics. So that is that. Okay. And I think that will do it. All right. And then the last thing I want to say is, well, actually, I'm going to make this one super, super fast. And that is selection tips. Oh, no. No, I'm sorry. I punched the wrong button. Saving that one. Production values, guys. That's what we do here. Selection tips. All right. Let's pull up any old list in ComicBase. And if you guys, again, this is like one of those things where everything works this way. And so knowing it pays off wherever you do it. Let me switch over to the right screen. All right. So let's say I pull up my title list, for instance, and I want to select, I want to, actually, that's probably the worst list because title list only allows you to select one thing. Let me say I'm going to add issues to print. And you know what? I'm just going to, let's just go down the list of Batman and Robin. That's simpler. All right. So here's Batman and Robin, right? Now remember, click Control A, select them all, right? If I click out on something else, it just selects that one. If I click and drag, it's going to select everything in between, right? So click and drag. If I click on one thing and I hold down the Shift key and I click down here, whoops, sorry. Get back. All right, so if I hold down the Control key and if I see I've dragged out a bunch of ranges, if I hold down the Control key and I click individual things, it does what's called discontinuous selection, where I can just say, yeah, I want that one, that one, that one. And it just piles up the selection, or I can say, I don't want that one, and it'll unselect it if you click it the second time with the Control key held down. Super, super useful. All the lists like this work this way in ComicBase. It, just be a list selecting champ. It will make you much faster. Let's see here. Oro says, I've memorized the Alt 0145 through 148 for curly quotes and apostrophes. Is there a better shortcut, please? There would be, except that we're not controlling that one. That's actually the keys that come off of your keyboard itself. What we do for entering diacritical characters like the curved quotes and so forth, we actually, the way we handle it in-house is we have a custom ComicBase keyboard map where we install it as if we were running a foreign keyboard, which just had proper curved quotes on it. And if you guys are interested, I could post that keyboard mapping and you actually could select that just like you'd come up if you guys are running multiple multiple languages. You can select the keyboard map down at the bottom right hand. There's one called the ComicBase keyboard map where you say, for instance, if you hit like Control Shift right bracket, it gives you a single curve quote. Control Shift left bracket gives you a single left curve quote, and so forth. But basically, we've mimicked, and this is one that Apple definitely did get right the first time. We've mimicked the keyboard mappings that are used on Macs for typing all those special keyboards. Just instead of using the Command key, you got to use the Control key because it's Windows versus Mac. But that is a much more sensible way of entering diacritical characters. I like I say, if you guys are interested in that, I can see if I can find a way to post that in, or at least a link to that keyboard mapping in the chat for the video. All right, and let me see here. So we talked about this selection tips, and then I'm going to go. I'm going to skip picture tips because we're hitting the end of our time. But I am going to catch on to tip number 1. Get faster internet for less. All right, so not a ComicBase tip per se, but this is one that will, it'll probably make the most, impact in your life, not just ComicBase. And so I figured let's put it out there. As things have turned out, I've actually dealt with a couple, 3 customers just recently who, it's like, yeah, I had a little trouble and download the software, blah, blah, blah. And we can set up a remote session with them to, make it so we can log in. You guys have all done tech support this way, where the technician can, basically see your screen, and you can move your mouse around and, and you can click things with each other. And you can see, you can help the guy out. It's like holding his hand. And a couple times just in the last 2 weeks, I've just been like, wow, man, this is taking forever to connect. What are you, are you on like some really dodgy wireless connection? What's going on? And it's just been psychotic how slow some people's internet is, and by that I'm not being a snob. I mean yes, yeah, I'm rocking a 1 gigabit connection up and down right now after 20 years of waiting for it. But and so I am happy as a clam about that. Thank you, United, Internet, and I promise it'll be no more or no less than I'll give you at least a week off before I call you again and say when's the 2 gig one coming. Um, but anyway, let's see here. Let's see. A question on the chat here. To confirm, if we purchase a hard copy of ComicBase, we can still immediately download the newest version of ComicBase. Yes, that is true. Yeah, whenever you're buying ComicBase, you have a choice at shipping to say whether you want download only or you want us to send you a physical copy. Whatever you choose on that one, the download is going to appear in your chat immediately. Okay, but anyway, but I've been talking to some folks, and it's like, wow, the internet connection is crazy, and my response is, well, let's check this out, man. Let's see what's going on with you, because that's really weird that this is all taking so very very long. And let me go ahead because I'm not on the computer I want to be on. Let me let's see. Okay, that'll get me there. All right, let me pop this open on the other browser here so I can see it. Okay. All right. And there's a way of starting to diagnose this kind of thing to see what's going on. So the first thing I'd say is if you're wondering if your internet is just dodgy as heck, and if you call us and one of the techs said, "Wow, that's some bad internet there," it probably is, because we're fairly polite, but we've all been. When I started ComicBase, I was on dial-up. We've all been there, man. But in this day and age, there really is no excuse to be running anything less than about 10 megabits. That's if you're in a war-torn country right now. I mean, it's no matter how bad the rural is, even multi meg is the standard. So if you're getting kilobits down or like 1 or 2 megabits down, something's wrong. I mean, like, and at that point, the way you'd find out and the way you'd establish that is you start by going to a site called speedtest.net. So I'm going to go over here, speedtest.net, and it's going to figure out where you are. I'm near Chapel Hill, Tennessee. I'm not really. I'm in Franklin, but it figures out the nearest server, and then you just click the go button. It'll do a little dance, and then you'll see what speed your particular internet's putting out at that moment in time. And so this particular one here with the live stream running is doing 920 megs down, which that's wonderful. Again, thank you, United Communication. Your gig service is lovely. And so it'll do the down speed. Down speed is what you consume most of. That's your streaming videos. That's when you're downloading ComicBase. That's down, doing stuff like that. Your up speed, typically less important for people. Like when you send an email, you're sending a tiny amount of data up the line. If you back up a database to the cloud, you're sending a fair amount of data up the line. But for most things that people do on their computers, they're not sending a ton of data up the line. So the down speed matters much more for most folks. Now we care about our upload speed because our upload speed is your download speed when you're downloading things. But these are great numbers. There are higher numbers in the world. I want them, but I'll take this. This is fine. What I'm seeing when I'm connecting onto other people though is I'm seeing like numbers like 3 megabits down, megabit and a half up, 5 megabits down, 2 megabits up. Those are miserable numbers. I mean, these are the kind of numbers that I haven't seen since like 2004, 2005. There's no excuse today. I don't care how cheap you are to have speeds like that. And so if you go to speedtest.net and you're getting numbers and they don't have at least 2 digits in terms of the megabits. First of all, if it doesn't say megabits or better, if you got kilobits showing and you don't have at least 2 digits to the left of the decimal, call your service provider. Something is wrong. I am literally unaware of a plan in the United States that delivers megabit speeds below 10 megabits. I did some checking on this, and so for instance, Xfinity, which is to say Comcast, they run a, let me see if it'll switch over to my face. Yeah, fine, that switched over to my face. I don't know why it hates the other cards, video cards so much. Anyway, but Xfinity offers a plan for low-income households, which the terms of it are, it's called the Internet Essentials. It's $9.95 a month. That gives you 50 megabits down, 5 megabits up. those are the kind of numbers everyone should be seeing. I looked all around, other providers, Cox, whoever, what have you, and I mean, there is no excuse. I looked at Starlink. So if there was a war going on in my country and I need to get my internet from space, and if I need to send up my internet from a telephone line, I would be getting 50. I'd still be getting 50 megabits down with Starlink. So anyway, if you are go to speedtest.net and you're not getting at least 20, 30, 40, 50 megabits down, for God's sake, call your service provider. And when you do, there is, I mean, there's a good reason, and I'm sorry, there's a bad reason, and there's an even worse reason why you might be getting something slower than that. Bad reason is that there's something wrong. I mean, people's cable connections get old. The stuff got installed, rats have been chewing through it. Whatever the deal is, you're sitting in the part of the house where you're behind a halfway built Faraday cage. Whatever the thing is, but there's a thing you can do on your own to fix it. And if there isn't, Comcast or whoever you've got for an internet service provider should be able to fix it. They should be able to roll a truck to your place, fix the line, and get you the speed that that you're paying for. And then the worst reason is it could be you're just on a really old plan and they're literally throttling you for just because, well, when you signed up for our plan in 2012, 20 megabits was a lot, and you decided to choose, the cheapest plan we had, and so we hosed you down for $69 a month, or maybe we bundled in your TV with that, or whatever the thing was, and we only promised you 20, and then as our network capacity grew and 20 became a laughable number for coming down, we, being Comcast, because I've experienced this, never, ever, ever told you that, yeah, for the same price, we now give you 2, 3, 10 times the speed. If you were a new customer signing up for the same thing at the same amount of money, we would be giving you far, far more data. We never bumped up the speed on your line. We never gave you the whole thing because you never asked. So for God's sake, ask. And furthermore, I'm going to say, go to, if you're getting these speeds like, anything less than 10 for darn sure, anything less than 50, I'd worry, unless I somehow chose I get to pay a buck 23 in used pennies for my internet, which do not do. It's not a good plan to get through life. But anyway, but unless you specifically signed up for the I get really crummy internet plan, as in like I get 2005 internet in 2023, you are almost certainly entitled to more. If you are not getting that, or if there's a brand new plan that offers at the same price, the higher thing, literally tell your guys, and do use this strategy to say, hey guys, I noticed that if I were signing up as a new customer on the whole thing, you'd be giving me much higher speed, blah, 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 at the same amount of money or even less money. So as a result, I need you to cancel my stuff. And they'll be like, what? Here, let me transfer you to our retention department because we can't stand a valued customer like you leaving. You will then be subjected to long holds, followed by a very earnest and scared person saying, oh my goodness, we love you so much. What can we ever possibly do to keep you? And the answer is, of course, you can give me the same deal you'd give me if I were a new customer, which after some amount of wheedling, they will inevitably do, because the alternative is that you will become a new customer of the competitor next door, or you'll sign up in your wife's name, or you'll sign up in your dog's name, whatever it takes. But there's no reason they cannot give you the same deal they would give to a new guy as an existing guy. This is insanity, but cable companies do this all the time. Do not put up with it. So do yourselves a favor, guys. Get on the horn tonight and make that happen, and you will be much happier. And the next time you try to watch a Netflix movie or download a copy of ComicBase or something like that, and it doesn't take forever, you will be a happier guy. So anyway, that's all I'm going to go for now. Let's see here. Let's see a couple of comments we have on here. Greg Hex says, okay, yes. Andre says, here we have access to 3 gig fiber internet here in Quebec. Yes, that is nice. Internet, nothing is better than cable and not Wi-Fi. Yeah. So the other thing is, if your speed test is saying that you're getting fantastic speed, but you are definitely not getting that speed, it could be the problem is really coming between your internet connection at your computer and it could be that your Wi-Fi is super slow. Now these days, gigabit in the house is a common thing. Wi-Fi 5 to 6 will get you there. There's a lot of different flavors of Wi-Fi 5 and 6. Again, if you're rocking sub, 500 megabits in your own house on your Wi-Fi connection, either move closer to your router or get a different router. By the way, another pro tip on this whole thing: do not be afraid for 1 second. If you know, if you're with any kind of major internet provider at all, find out what a compatible router is. Do not pay the 10 to 19.99 a month it is to rent that router from them. That is sucker money. It used once upon a time, internet routers were exotic and expensive, and they were like $500 to buy one. These days, you can buy a top of the line Gucci self-configuring router, for multi-gig for like 89 bucks on eBay, or just wherever you get routers. But yes, find out, if you are still renting your router, from your internet provider, stop doing that. It's a bad thing. Save your, I mean, the ROI on buying one, and just using your own custom one is typically 6 months or so, before it pays for itself. At that point, you're just saving, saving, saving. But, while you're at it, make sure that you buy yourself a current internet generation. Don't say, "Oh, hey, this guy went ahead one for $5, but it's only, wireless G," from, 10 or 15 years ago. Don't do that. Wireless 6E is the gold standard today. Get it if you can. If you can't, at least get wireless 5. But get something that's gonna grow with you a little bit, because you're on the, let's face it, we're on the internet way too much, but it's a big part of our lives, and it's no fun if everything is slow. So, if you've got internal connections that are too slow, fix them. You can go cabled. So for instance, my computer right now is wired over Cat 6 to, straight to my router. So there's no question about it dropping out in the middle of things. But you can get similar speeds, I'm going to say, these days with wireless, as long as you're relatively close to your router and you don't have a lot of very heavy walls in place. If you do have very heavy walls in place, there are solutions that will fix that for you as well, even in really large houses or with lots of strange curves and bends and stuff like that. There's things called mesh networks now, which cost a few $100, but they'll get you going even without the cables. If you can make your thing work with a cable, absolutely rock solid, highly recommended. But if you just want a really rock solid internet solution that's wireless, those are also available these days. Things are much, much better in the aggregate than they were 10 years ago. Don't live like it's 10, 15 years ago. It's no fun. All right. And with that said, I'm going to let it go for now because I'm about losing my voice. Guys, thank you for joining us on this one. We will catch you on the next one. Take care. Bye bye.